BreachLock is a global leader in continuous attack surface discovery and penetration testing. Since BreachLock was founded, they are adding over 50 new customers every month. They have discovered over 1 million reported vulnerabilities and performed more than 20,000 pen testing engagements, including pen tests for over 15,000 web applications, 8,000 mobile apps, more than 100,000 APIs, over 10,000 cloud security audits, and over 200,000 network endpoints. They test your entire attack surface and help you mitigate your next cyber breach before it occurs. Know your risk. Contact BreachLock today. Visit securityweekly.com/breachlock.
Hi, folks. I'm Adrian Sanabria, the host of Enterprise Security Weekly. Every week, we interview the most interesting folks we can find talking about the most pressing cybersecurity issues and challenges facing the enterprise today. Myself and my co-hosts have each been in the industry for decades, long enough to see the patterns in the industry and explore where trends are going. In addition to enterprise challenges, we also follow the vendor space, the most interesting security startups emerging, technology and product trends, all of the most interesting funding and acquisition announcements. Finally, we love to discuss the latest trends in tech and how they'll impact cybersecurity. If you're wondering how the latest in AI, quantum computing, cloud, and DevOps is going to impact security a few years down the road, you should follow the Enterprise Security Weekly podcast.
To ensure you don't lose access to Security Weekly content you know and love, please make sure that you subscribe to your favorite podcast feeds on an alternative platform, such as Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, Podcast Addict, Pocket Casts, or anywhere else you listen to podcasts. You can visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to find the buttons to subscribe to each show now. I think they mean that Google Podcasts went away. And therefore, if you were listening on Google Podcasts or any other platform that went away, but Google's the most notable one, I think, you want to make sure you find Security Weekly shows by going to securityweekly.com/subscribe. Alrighty. Let's talk about your firmware arriving, a study of firmware update vulnerabilities. Perhaps the most fascinating thing when I saw this, so first I saw the paper, then they had a website, then they have multiple GitHub repositories.
Yep.
And so that's the most interesting part. But to get there, you have to know that there was a paper that was written by some really smart people. And I want to say they presented it at Usenix or a conference like that.
It was at Usenix.
Usenix,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so basically what they set out to do, collect a bunch of firmware and analyze it. Nothing new there. But what they were analyzing the firmware for was pulling each firmware apart and looking at, is the way that this firmware platform updates itself secure? And they had some criteria for that. It's very, very technical and involved. And they had to overcome challenges of, like, how do I figure out how the firmware is updating? And then once I do that, how do I figure out if it's updating securely or not? Are they checking the signatures or hashes, or, how are they validating new firmware on there? So that's the basis of the research, which in and of itself is pretty unique.
Yep.
I've not seen research that dove in specifically on that. And they created a tool that you're going to be able to download. I don't think you can download it yet. I don't think they've uploaded. Maybe they did actually, since I saw the story. When I was checking before the show, I should. We'll check right now. I believe they're. So it says we're cleaning up our code and we'll release it in this official repository. Last I checked, this repository.
The repository is there.
Yeah.
The repository is there, so you can actually download the code, which is awesome now.
Yep.
The other interesting thing is they have another GitHub repo where, and not all the research that looks at firmware does this. They say in the README for firmware-dataset in their GitHub is we collected 16.9 terabytes
Yep.
of firmware images from official websites of vendors, open FTP sites, and open source repositories.
Yep.
Currently, over 157,000 firmware images, about 6 terabytes from 204 vendors, were pre-processed. And I think it was even a subset of that they found. How many vulnerabilities? Anyone want to guess? They analyzed a subset of that, 150 firmware images, 33 device families, leading to both 0-day and end-day vulnerabilities.
Yep.
They were disclosed responsibly, resulting in the assignment of 25 CVE IDs and 1 PSV ID. What is a PSV ID?
Hall security verification.
Hall security identification, apparently.
I have no idea what a PSV is.
I don't know either.
Dutch total soccer? What?
I
Infectious diseases?
I don't know. Google searches. I was reading my Google search from the screen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. But in any case, so they found 25, 26 perhaps. If a PSV is a vulnerability, they found 26 vulnerabilities. And they have all the information about the vulnerabilities that they found. But now going back to the firmware data set, they say that in this data set, 204 vendors were pre-processed, and they're working on more. However, figure 1 is they looked at, I believe, the 6 terabytes worth of data of firmware images, which is a lot of freaking firmware. And they looked at the operating system platform and the CPU architecture. And so I won't read it all because you can go find it yourself. But what I thought was a big takeaway, and this could be skewed because of the firmware, that's available. However,
Sure.
I think it's a pretty good representation. 61% were Linux based.
Yep.
In terms of CPU architecture, 64 were MIPS based.
Yep.
So like that tells me if we're looking at protection, detection, security research, you're
Run
focusing
Windows.
on Linux on MIPS, right?
Yep.
So, yeah. And so then I was like, well, they downloaded 16.9 terabytes of firmware. That's awesome. Like, where is that? And they're like, well, you can go do that on your own. So here's a CSV of all the firmware that we found.
Two CSVs.
Two CSVs, one for I think that's one's HTTP, HTTPS, and one is FTP.
Yep.
And they're like, by the way, here's a Python script that you can run again, and it uses those CSVs and it goes and downloads it, provided that you have like 17 terabytes of free space on your NAS, which is interesting. Because go ahead, Larry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I was looking at building a NAS as one of my upcoming projects.
Same.
Right? Projects have projects, the whole thing. But so I want a NAS for like backing up media for podcasts and videos. Like usually Larry's in here like every other week. Like, hey, we would record this, we'd record that for work or for whatever, right? So I want to have somewhere to back that up. I also have like over 500 Kung Fu movies on DVD that I want to rip and I want to put on the NAS. And then like my third use case was I've got like a firmware collection problem. Like I like to collect firmware.
I know the feeling.
And so now my requirements have changed to go, now I need like 17 terabytes just for firmware.
You need more than 17 terabytes because arguably when you start looking at this stuff, when you start looking at the list that they gave, there's only a small subset of manufacturers out there for folks that had stuff available. And there's still going to be more models, and like 17 terabytes is just to capture this stuff. And you've probably already got several terabytes worth of firmware already.
It's just,
it's
awesome.
You should probably consider a petabyte.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, Larry and I, day jobs we collect firmware, and I don't know how much storage we have, but I know we have like over 150 million binary samples from firmware in our database. So
you could like start a Twitter like the VX Underground, right, and just host like terabytes of firmware. That'd be dope, right?
Right?
Yeah.
And just host it, and then you can buy a hard drive with all the malware on it from VX Underground.
Yeah, that's right.
Have you fed all of that data through any AILLM apparatus?
Not yet. So that
that's where it's a great question, right? That's what we're kind of hinting at.
That was sort of the next thing that. So, not only did they give you where you can go get the stuff, the lists that they use, and the script to use to download it, they also gave you a script to use binwalk to unpack it.
Wow.
And a main roll up that integrates effectively all three, so you can go download and unpack with one script.
Yeah, I wonder, is the 16.9 terabytes, is that packed or unpacked?
That's a great question.
Oh my God, that's a great question.
Right? Because then also binwalk is not the greatest tool to unpack firmware.
Nope. It was much better stuff. But
what do you think? Like, what's your choice? I'm curious if we probably have the right. Ready on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Unblob.
Okay, good. See, there you go.
I'm calling. I'm calling BS on that. That was not timed perfectly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we did not rehearse that.
Well, because when Craig Hefner's company got bought by Microsoft,
Refirm Labs
got bought by Microsoft, and Craig is the developer of one of the lead developer, right, of Binwalk. There was others involved. That hadn't been updated in a while.
2 years.
The Binwalk that you install on your Linux distributions come from someone else that forked it.
Yep, and is actually doing updates.
And yeah, and it's actually pretty decent, but still, as Larry and I agree, on Blob is a much better tool in a project, albeit a little difficult to get running. Although they have like a Docker script,
Yep,
you can run it in a Docker container.
Yep.
So,
and so when you start looking at the other project, their checkup is looking for the update mechanisms and so forth.
The actual code that now, once you've downloaded and unpacked all the firmware, is going through the firmware.
Yep,
and looking at that. So they're using Firm
AE, Firmidine, and
for
or
emulation.
Ghidra and firmware modkit potentially.
Yeah,
For doing
so there's a lot of
patching.
I have on my other future project list for my day job to like write up a guide on how you do firmware analysis using open source tools, right?
Yep.
And so those are all ones that I've either looked at and tested, like Firmidine, and others that I've looked at and flagged for later study.
So, Paul, my Google foo came through. A PSV is a platform security validation. It's an assessment approach designed to find and document vulnerabilities. So, there you go.
The only one that I could, and so I Googled for in the paper, they have the list of CVE details. The last one is the PSV. And the only other place that I can find mention of the PSV 2022 is on Netgear's website.
Okay. That's interesting. Did they find vulnerabilities in Netgear? I didn't.
The PSV is specifically related to Netgear.
They did, and it looks like some of those they should have gotten paid a bounty. Perhaps it depends on if it's in scope for the bounty. It has to be a currently supported model and a currently supported firmware version, and it has to be a vulnerability that is reachable. This goes back to I don't think I covered my own blog post, but I wrote a blog post. I ripped apart some Netgear firmware, and I talked about their bug bounty and how awesome I think it is they have a bug bounty. It was certainly not a knock on Netgear. In fact, it was just the opposite. Like, they're one of the few vendors on this list, like firmware vendors. Ubiquiti, I think, has a bounty as well, that has a bug bounty program. So.
Yep, and if you notice the second one from the bottom there, the 2023 40 80 84.
Yeah, that's Linksys. I think there's a spelling mistake. It says Linsys.
Yeah, but look to the right. Look at the last one there, last model.
Oh, yeah. It's a WOT54GL version 4.30.18.06.
Huh.
We knew there was vulnerabilities in there. We just didn't get around. We didn't get around to
it wasn't part of the book. Yep.
Hold on a second. You two didn't look at the firmware?
Well, we did. We didn't go into looking for vulnerabilities and running exploits for it. We left that to everyone else.
Yep.
So anyway, that's really, really freaking cool.
Yep. So if we tie this to another story, Paul,
let's do it.
Looking at some of the vendors there, easily, I'm using the fuzzy napkin. 1/3 to a half of the CVEs that were reported were in one vendor, TP-Link.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because now, you have a story on TP-Link.
But there could be that TP-Link has a lot of firmware that is available on the internet that they analyze. So that data could be skewed. However, I did cover where there was a call for investigation into specifically TP-Link, just TP-Link by a House Select Committee on the strategic competition between the United States and Chinese Communist Party, identified the growing risk posed by Chinese Wi-Fi routers in the U.S. In the United States manufactured by TP-Link Technologies, and called on the Department of Commerce to verify the threat and investigate the company.
Yep. To the point being here is that they are potentially looking to have TP-Link banned for sale in the U.S., like Huawei and so forth,
Right.
because it is their assertion that across the globe, so many ties to political, election, you name it, manipulations are tied to, excuse me, not attacking stuff at AWS. It's taking control of the various political people's political actors' home internet running TP-Link routers. Like what they're saying is that the Chinese government is manipulating elections because they know that these vulnerabilities exist in TP-Link routers, and they're hacking the political candidates and the political parties through the TP-Link routers.
That's interesting. I didn't get that tied to the elections.
Yeah.
Was that further down in the article?
Yeah, it's
Or maybe a different article you read on it.
So tied to vulnerabilities exist or the ability to influence TP-Link, right? So I mean, I think those
a
are
little bit of
two.
both. Yeah, a little bit of both.
Mm.
Yep. The TP-Link is subject to draconian national security laws and the PRC and be forced to hand over U.S. sensitive information by Chinese intelligence officials.
Yeah.
Right.
So that PRC cyber military forces use TP-Link routers as a part of hacking campaign targeted against government officials in European countries. So it's not just U.S., it's worldwide.
Right.
I went over to Jeff Mann's house. What was that? A couple weeks ago, Jeff, and I was surprised that all of your gear was Huawei. I was shocked.
Interesting side note.
Uh-huh.
But I also think TP-Link's only part of the picture here.
Yes.
Right? Like there's like millions of devices. So it says that TP-Link selling over 160 million products annually to more than 170 countries. But that's just TP-Link. Think about all of the other manufacturers that maybe they're not Chinese companies.
Yep.
Right? But certainly now they're using components, firmware and or hardware that's coming from China. Now you can extrapolate that out. Most of the components that are in your PC, servers, and laptops today have hardware and firmware that come from China.
Yep. And
so I think it's kind of, I don't want to just like downplay the threat, but also I want to point out the expanded scope we should have of this problem.
It's not just, it's arguably not just a TP-Link problem, and it's not just software written by TP-Link that's the problem. Like we were having some discussions with some folks about like code provenance. Like the Department of Commerce could very much say, you know, hey, we don't want any code on stuff that is being used in the U.S. government written in China.
Right.
And okay, that's great. Well, how do you prove that? Well, how do you prove the provenance of your code? Well, maybe you actually have some guy in Russia that wrote code for a Chinese company that did a commit to that code on an AWS server based in North America, where they used a server to compile that firmware in Arizona, which then got delivered to products.
For
like
sure.
how do you prove which lines of code was written by the Russian for a Chinese company that was compiled in the US?
Larry, how did you know my client?
It's every one of Josh. It's every one of them.
That's I know.
But it's not just a firmware. It's not just like the whole thing. There's components within the firmware.
Right.
Like we've talked about web application and web server vulnerabilities inside firmware.
Yep.
That's often I've traced that back to, in the case of D-Link, right? Chinese company.
Yep.
That wrote that web server software that runs in the embedded space that was licensed by a company. So like the supply chain for this stuff is very complicated.
Who wrote those 3 lines in that JavaScript library that does your authentication that runs on top of your web server?
Right.
Guys,
so
where was it written?
Maybe just maybe this is an unsolvable problem.
It is.
Ding, 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 ding.
It absolutely is. We can't get people to not use certificate stores that say "do not use."
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
well, that's a great example, Bill, because that's in the the firmware build for UEFI. It's a shining example.
But it's also, it makes me think that we need to start thinking about other elements of the risk equation, like threat. You know, like the fact that there might be Chinese targeting people that are candidates for election. You know, I've been wondering for years, Tyler hasn't been on for a while now, but I've been challenging Tyler to find me on my home, on my PC at home behind my stock install from my telecom provider protections, which we all talk about is negligible. But I'm like, so find me, and everybody I ask, they're like, well, I'd have to send you a phishing email. And so my thought is, okay, but I'm findable. I mean, I'm a needle in a haystack. I'm one of billions of systems that are out there. Who would take the time to find me? Nation state. Um, but for everybody else,
Not worth it.
that's an element of threat being the way I learned it back in the day, not being all the attacks and bots and ransomwares, but the actual people behind all those things, the bad guys, the enemies, the the criminals that want to do damage or steal or whatever.
And I would also argue, Jeff, that you would be a much easier target for that just because of your public persona, right? We know where in the country you are. You've got a
Sure.
background that I assume is real, right? Like, so
Yeah,
a
but
real,
oftentimes, I mean, there are cases where individual people and individual companies are targeted for specific reasons. But if we come back to the conversation that sparked all of this in terms of like insecure routers and hardware and IoT gear, there have been there's like a storied history of like they're not targeting the person, they're not targeting the company, they're targeting the device
Sure.
because it has a vulnerability,
Sure.
and they're leveraging that vulnerability because they want to monetize it, right? The one that pops into my head was a specific case in Mexico where ISPs had deployed these routers that had vulnerabilities, and attackers went in there, and all they did once they got in was they changed the DNS records so that when you went to popular banking sites in Mexico, it went to a fake banking site and they were able to grab credentials, and that's how they were monetizing. So that stuff does still
yeah,
happen, right?
but
It's not in the context of like influencing an election. That's a different threat actors and a different
you
attack
need to
altogether.
think bigger about warfare though, right? Like, so like
Yes.
if we were to, like, so if let's just, and I'm making up numbers, I have no idea what this is, but so like if we were to say that TP Link or whatever were to have a 30% of all Americans own a TP Link as their internet gateway, right? And I were to shut that down, right, and remove that internet capability, not influencing elections or anything like
Right.
that. Well,
But that happened a few months ago. Remember, there was a big ISP that had like a huge outage, and it had to do with it. I don't think it was threat actors. I think the ISP had an incident where they accidentally bricked a bunch of people's routers. I don't know if you guys remember that, and it
yeah,
took out like thousands of people. To back up your point, Bill, of if you wanted
Which
to
is not
cause
the first time
disruption,
that ISP has done stuff like that.
sure,
right? So yeah, if you wanted to cause disruption,
yeah,
well, let's get a
and
good exploit
dissent,
for
right?
Linux on MIPS, and well, I mean Mirai kind of does that, which is interesting.
But again, Paul, that's if you're looking at this formulaically,
Mhm.
that's evaluating what is at risk, and what's the likelihood that it's going to happen, what's the likelihood that I'm going to be targeted, what's the likelihood of success of even if it's an incidental, oh, I just happen to have the thing that's vulnerable type of attack. And that's a different conversation than even the threat, or well, this system is vulnerable, let's fix it. But how do we do that, and how do we do it at scale, and how do we let everybody know that's got one know that they need to upload a new version or a patch or do some other fix when they're probably 99% of the people out there using them are oblivious to
That's
any of
right.
this being an
Or
issue.
or not, right? Or not allowing that update or that patch or whatever to get on there, right? Like that same problem, right? Like that exactly. You're exactly right, Jeff. Like, because nobody knows. Nobody, like, what firmware is your your ISP provided router. There there's five people on this call, maybe three of us on this call know that answer, right? Like, so, and Paul's one of them because he disassembled it with blob or whatever it was called.
You're right, but
Yeah.
I just replaced it with my own basically Linux or BSD box, right?
Hmm.
That I keep updated, but not everyone does that, obviously. Like us nerds do that. but the rest are left with these devices. And some of us have some of these devices that could be susceptible as well. And I think it's the ubiquitous nature of these computing platforms that is the thing that saved us. So we see pockets of these devices that have a commonality that an attacker can use to accomplish their goal. Maybe they want to make some money, maybe they want to mine some cryptocurrency, maybe they want to create a botnet and then they're going to rent out the botnet or use it in some other attack. And that's what we're seeing today. But there's pockets, right? And Mirai is just one of those pockets, which is kind of interesting actually. There was a CVE issued for Mirai.
I saw that. Unbelievable.
Dude, this is
nice segue, Paul.
That
Thank
was
you.
beautiful.
I really wanted, I didn't have time to do the research to figure out of all the CVEs that have been issued. However, there's
in all the gin joints in all the world.
right?
Good one.
Does anyone know how many CVEs have been issued? I mean, we could find out. It's a lot, right?
Like 20, it's not a lot, right? We talked about, I think it's what somebody told us this stat, and I think it was you, Paul. It was like 25,000 or something. That
it was 30,000 something when I looked several years ago. So
I mean, I'm in the ballpark. So let's just say
Yes.
45,000, right? In my mind, you would think that would be 45 CVEs have been issued this year, right? No, like
52,000 is
can I get
answer.
Can I get 60? Can I get 60?
Yeah.
Don't worry, the year's not over yet. You can get 60.
So of all the 60,000 CVEs that have been issued, how many have been issued for malware or malicious code? Right? Is this is it the only one? It's the only one I'm aware of. But again, I don't even know how you find that out. Like, how do you parse through
Are they going to issue a patch? Right?
Well, so then it gets hilarious, right? Like this, talk about the tables being turned. Like, do the Mirai people, do they have a bug bounty? Like, can I submit to their bug bounty? Like, are they going to fix it? But like, joking aside, disclosing that and creating a CVE, is that really what we want to be doing? Do we want the attackers to know that they have a vulnerability? Because now they're just going to go fix it. And having a vulnerability in something like Mirai gives us the capability to disrupt botnet
So you think
operations.
do you think the bad guys are more diligent about patching than the entire population of the planet?
Patching whose stuff?
It depends on the threat actor, on how diligent they are. Like
motivation,
generalize like that. Like I think some organizations are really good at patching, and others aren't. And there's a whole spectrum. And attackers are probably the same.
Oh yeah,
the same way.
Oh yeah.
Is there anybody behind Mirai anymore anyway?
Yeah, or is it just it's basically a bunch of forks, right? Like
yeah, it's arguably a bunch of forks at this point.
Mm-hmm.
But who's behind the forks? I mean,
it's turtles all the way down.
It's forks all the way down.
Yeah,
it's forks all the way down. Right.
I do want to say though, some malware has support contracts. I have spoken with folks, right, that do the threat intelligence and malware intelligence that monitor those channels and the attackers and go, look, they're producing this piece of malicious software. It comes with a support contract. It comes with bug fixes. If there's vulnerabilities, they fix them, right? But again, those have limited lifespans before the person gives up or develops some new software, or that software is just so well known and detected now they have to abandon it and create something else. So it's kind of a difficult thing to track because I think they tend to have a pretty short lifespan in terms of this stuff.
Say, Speaking of forks, I have a fork story, if I may.
Tell your fork story.
I'm sitting in my rocking chair on my porch. It's story time. Many
story
years
time
ago.
with Jeff. You know, a long time ago, we used to have story time with Twitchy.
If I may.
Well, we're going to fork this conversation to Larry before Jeff tells his fork story.
Real quick, I taught 556 IoT hacking in Amsterdam last week.
If it was truly a fork, I'd be telling my story at the same time, by the way. So that's not a fork.
And one of my students right down in front, and I have a selfie to show you, Paul, was, I've been listening to the show for a really long time. Whatever happened to Twitchy?
Oh my God.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, it's been a long time. He says, yeah, right. Ask Paul if he remembers the guy that gave him a ride home one night from BrewCon and bought him beers.
Oh yeah, I do.
That was him.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a super nice guy.
Yep.
I don't remember his name, but yeah, I was leaving the party and he was like, yeah, dude, I'll totally give you a ride home. Back to your hotel.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
He was in my class.
Oh, that's small world.
Yeah.
So that was not a fork, but back to my story. So many years ago, when I was it was actually before the pit, was before we reorganized, and this is pretty much before the days of Linux. So we were working with Solaris, and the venerable organization that I worked for had bought source code. So we had the opportunity to look at source code of Solaris, whatever version it was. And so, guy I was working with and we decided one day to figure out how the fork command worked. So we were going through all the code, unpacking all the libraries, looking at all the different function calls, writing it out on a whiteboard. And after about 3 hours of doing that, we kind of stepped back and said, it forks. The end.
Does it spoon?
No, it literally, it's what I was saying. Larry would have told the story. I would have told the story at the same time because it was forking and both were happening at the same time.
What a beautiful forking
on the
story,
whiteboard,
Jeff.
it looked like a fork.
Yeah.
Hence the name.
That was a beautiful forking story, Jeff.
It was a two-tined fork.
Oh, boy.
Fork you, Larry.
I'm not going to say it. Not even going to say it. It's a family show. No.
So wait, do we think we should be issuing CVEs for malicious software?
Probably not. Did they say why?
Only if there's a vulnerability in the malicious software.
Don't we want to not disclose that to the world? Like, don't we disclose things to the world so the vendors will patch them?
What would be the main end users, like what would be the benefit to humanity of that?
Is it showing up in any scan engine? Is there a plugin?
Yeah, that's
that checks for vulnerabilities
right.
For Tenable, or somebody check the Qualys knowledge base.
That would be awesome.
You don't get your PCI certification because your Mirai is out of date.
You have unsupported malware. You fail.
Yeah,
that needs to be on a T-shirt. CVE 2024 45 163. No PCI certification because your Mirai is out of date.
Right.
That's terrifying.
Hey, I wonder, what's their disclosure policy? Like, yeah, it's fascinating.
That's really that's and to the point. Like, yeah, should there be a CVE if there's vulnerability? Not because there is the presence of said software or the software exists, but because there's a vulnerability in that software, and this is exactly what that is. Like, there's a remote denial of service exploit in the Mirai botnet. So if you exploit this, or if you use if you exploit it in the wild and it has a CVE and there's a patch, it can go on the sysakev.
I don't think so. There's no benefit to humanity, right? Like it should be used for operations for taking down Mirai.
I agree.
Yeah.
But now anybody can take down Mirai.
Well, maybe that's the point of publishing it, right?
Yep.
Maybe.
Anyway.
Hey, can I ask a favor? Can we switch to your story number 21? Because I've got a question.
Sure.
My story number 21?
Yeah.
This badge is my badge is the title of this one. And just to set the stage for Josh, before your question, this is RFID hacking on a physical penetration test is the setting. And so there's basically what the article outlined and went into great detail about one of these avenues is if I'm trying to gain physical access to a facility, I can do one of three things, conceivably all of them if I want to. I can try and clone people's badges as they're walking around, right? We've all seen this. It's been in TV shows and probably movies and such, right? Walk up next to someone and you've got the RFID with the antenna that you wave around and you're trying to clone people's badges. Then the next attack is you can go to an already installed reader.
Yep.
And you can take it apart.
Take it off the wall
and put an ESP key
or a BLE key
or some electronics that sit inside of it that are capturing the data coming off the cards.
No, it's capturing the data coming off of the wire.
Oh, okay. On the
So
backhand.
yep.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the card is presented to the reader. The reader is
reads
doing
it.
the RF part. The reader then sends data to the controller
Mm-hmm.
to know whether or not you're allowed to open the door. Or you,
On
so
a
it's capturing it off the
a
wire.
serial connection, USB.
Weekend.
Probably not encrypted.
Yeah. What is? We
It,
talked
it
about
is
this.
it is
years
not
ago.
encrypted, and it is
Weekend.
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 Yes. Weekend. Thank you.
typically
Yes.
weekend. Yes.
I think we did one segment where we talked about that stuff at least.
Zach
and
Franklin
then-
did this 10 years ago. He built
Yeah, sure. None of this is new.
Yep.
Vampire.
But then you can get and I forget there's details in here about like you can go buy one of these. I don't know, they're like $700 or whatever. But it looks like an RFID reader. It has the 3M sticky tape on the back. You know the ones that like your wife uses to hang like command hooks.
Yeah.
It has that on the back, so you can put it on a wall. And when you go retrieve it later, you pull the things, and it doesn't damage the wall. But inside of it, it has a reader that's capturing the data from the cards, and then I believe a Wi-Fi connection that you can connect to retrieve the data. Now,
That's cool.
The tricky part is, because this is immediately where all our minds are going, is like, wait, where do I put this thing? I can't put it in front of a door that has an actual RFID lock associated with it because it's not going to open the lock because it's just a faux reader. So I got to put it in front of a door that doesn't have any kind of security controls, which means probably an internal door because probably the external doors all have actual readers that control
The bathroom.
the locking mechanism.
Put it in front of a
Yeah,
bathroom
put it in the
door.
put it in the back room.
Or just put it on the external because like the first one go up. No, oh, that's weird. That didn't work. Try the second one. Like
Right.
Like,
Or more importantly, you put it on a door that like one of the things you're saying, like put it on a door that doesn't have one, so that people walk up to the building and I need to badge in, bloop, and the door
Always
opens,
works, right?
Because it always works, right?
That was the
So, I
implication
mean-
of the bathroom, Larry. It's like, of course, there's some places that do lock the bathroom door, but
Yep.
Yeah.
It
So
should
the
open.
reader isn't attached with any other wires, which could cause confusion or questions. It says. There's some workarounds. Placing the reader next to a door that is always unlocked seems one of the most logical options. It requires a successful tailgate to get in. It's like you have to get into the facility to then go place the reader.
You
So
know
that's
what?
the context.
This is what I love about hackers. This is exact. You know what? Someone just said. You know what? I'll just make my own.
Well,
I,
but
and,
here's-
like, I love it. And I
yeah, but
absolutely
that's
love it.
dumb. But that's dumb.
Why is it dumb?
I think Bill's saying that sometimes hackers are dumb.
Well, no,
I think I love it. I absolutely love it because
here's my conception. I looked at this story and I went, why would I build a fake RFID badge reader? Because look, when we want to get credit cards, what do? We get a skimmer. We do a facade on top of a credit card reader. Why would
That's
I
what I
just
thought it
build
was
an
first.
RFID skimmer?
Right, but that requires modifying a device that's
No.
in use in production in the client environment.
Or putting an overlay, and arguably putting an overlay over the top of something is a modification.
But so can two readers read a card at the same time?
Yes, because remember, a
Absolutely.
reader, a powered
Yes.
reader, is
Especially
sending-
RFID.
Energizes
building
the
electric
RFID.
fields, energizing the card,
And
then
it's
the
then
card,
broadcasting
the card is broadcasting. So all I
360
need-
for whatever
Right.
the distance.
As long
is.
as you're within that magnetic field, you
Yep.
should be able to capture.
So all I need is a
3 to 5
reader. I don't need
centimeters
I don't need to power the energization circuit of the reader. I just need to listen for broadcasts of a card.
You should go register hack6.org or whatever right now and build that.
Well, I mean, I'm just like, am I wrong?
I'm like, where's he going with this Hack 6? Oh, got it. It's one better than Hack 5. Got it.
And I mean,
Got
honestly,
it.
you could build this into something that was a sort of a little tiny patch or something, and just put it over top of the reader, whatever size or shape the reader is. Little black square or something, so it looks like it's a piece of trim or something or whatever.
Heck, make it look like a lens. Like there's a camera on the reader.
I suppose that's possible.
Oh, so I'm sorry. So this is $450
For a fully assembled kit.
fully assembled kit. It comes from physicalexploit.com. And they have other devices too. So Josh, to your point, I don't know if they have like a reader that can go on a reader.
Wait.
So not an ESP key that
when you say it's
we're talking
450,
about.
you're talking about the fake one.
The fake one is $450.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't. Jeff, do you happen to know how much those overlay skimmers cost people on AliExpress and everywhere else?
I do not.
Okay, they're not horribly much money, but I mean, if you could get an
Right.
RFID skimmer, For a couple of $100, I'm sure you can sell a hell of a lot of pen testers, these suckers.
Yeah, I buy one.
Yeah, it's just by definition, it's not a skimmer because the skimmer implies it's reading the
You
mag stripe or
nerds.
the chip as it's being inserted. In this case, a credit
What do you call
card.
an EMV overlay skimmer?
You got to call it a skimmer.
Oh, that is a skimmer, but this one for RFID because it's just intercepting the signal. I mean, the insert that
skimmer.
is
a
reading the
skimmer.
wire, that's a skimmer.
No, it's a skimmer.
Marketing wise, we're calling it a skimmer,
It's a
Jeff, so we
skimmer.
sell more of them.
Hey,
Fine.
let's not post this podcast. Let's just delete it. Let's just delete the podcast.
You know, let's just delete this whole section just needs to be deleted so we can go do that and sell a whole bunch of them.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I think of this shit sometimes, you
Yeah.
know, like
What
I
was the website that you
apologize,
said
but-
that you could buy the one that we're talking about? Where did you see that?
It's physicalexploit.com.
Oh, that's interesting. I want to check that out.
Yes.
Or more importantly, store.physicalexploit.com.
Store.physicalexploit.com is where you can go buy the stuff. And they've got training and a whole bunch of other things. I had not seen this company before.
Man, they're selling HID Maxi Procs for $850.
They're kind of pricey. I look at some of this stuff, like knowing what this hardware costs, I'm like, that's a significant markup.
That's a markup. Yeah.
It is.
Well, good for them.
Right? Yeah. I mean, if you just want to buy something that works and has support and, you're doing it as a professional. I mean, back to the hack, we talked about Hack 5 ever so briefly, right? Like, their stuff works, man, right? It's, so if you there's that.
Yep.
All right. I apologize. I thought, like, it's just struck me. Why don't we have RFID skimmers? So I wanted to talk about it. My apologies. Next story. I'm sorry.
And arguably, we kind of do. Specifically, my story. I don't know why mine got posted twice because my internet was lots of fun. But my story number one, the Ngate Android malware.
So it's like 1 or 15 until we fix the page.
Yep.
Yeah.
Ngate is an interesting take on some of the relay or replay based attacks that we saw against payment cards. Now, when you present your payment card to a phone or something of the like, or use your payment card, it's capturing the data going to the secure element and so forth, if I remember correctly. So it's effectively using your card as the skimmer itself and then sending that data off to a third party.
Well, it's using an Android app.
Yes, it's an app on your phone.
On your phone that's intercepting once the NFC data gets into your phone, they're intercepting that. Correct. And then sending it. Yeah.
Correct.
That's pretty cool.
Software-based skimmer, as it were.
Right. Is that on... You just have to download this app?
Yep.
A malicious app.
Yep. It is definitely a malicious app. Guised under the purpose of, what was it? Some payment for, hey, your thing is expiring. Come pay it. It's using this app.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully this is something that Google can watch for and not allow in the store.
Could they embed it in a gaming app or something like that? So it has extra features?
They could make it look at like any app they wanted, but Google has technology that's looking, and so does Apple, right? It looks inside of the code inside the app and analyzes it.
Yep.
I believe disassembles it and looks for backdoors, vulnerabilities as well. I want to say they also look for... Apple bought a company. I listened to a podcast interview. They bought a company that did iOS app analyzing. And they're like, oh, we want that. And they just baked it right into the App Store.
I mean,
code.
Maybe my experience is a little dated, but the access, for developers to the Google Play Store is a heck of a lot less restrictive.
Yes.
Than the other ones. And so, Jeff, that vehicle was pretty impressive.
Thank you. And it was blocks away, too.
Yeah, like you said.
I had an experience with Apple back in the early days of smartphones and trying to get apps. And, I was working with a company that was trying to build a payment app or just an e-commerce app. And they were very proud about going through Apple Store and they were citing that Apple had all sorts of layers of security and protections. I'm like, great, what are they? And has this thing been independently tested and verified? And Apple would not divulge anything. So, the security purist to me is like, yeah, then I don't want to use it. I don't want to endorse it because I want to know that it's been tested. I'm not going to just take Apple's word for it because Apple has a conflict of interest because they want to put something out there that's going to, they're going to get paid for. I'm sure they fixed that issue a long time ago.
I wanted to talk about
Oh,
Bill, you had a story about stealthy Linux malware.
does it run on the Sonic Drive-In operating system?
Yeah, dude, that was. I want to talk about that one. I'm very interested in hearing more about that one. But let's cover this because Bill and I both had this story. Now, I probably see this headline roughly once a week, like stealthy new Linux malware, and I'm like, yeah, well, okay, fine. And it's never all that interesting. This one was actually kind of interesting, to be honest with you, because when I think about it, UDEV rules are something that if you've done Linux administration or desktop stuff that you probably had to modify, that allows, typically you would do it to allow non-root users to interact with a specific device, right? So I plug in my Wi-Fi adapter, or no, what was I doing? I was plugging in my Ubertooth 1, and I was trying to get Kismet to recognize my Ubertooth 1. And because Mike Kershaw's awesome, he's like, Kismet does not run as root. Like, piss off, which is great. But then I was like, but to access the Ubertooth 1 device, you've got to have elevated privileges to access it in that way. And the way you allow that in Linux, the
UDEV.
primitive for that in Linux is called UDEV, and you create a rule that basically says, hey, when you plug this device in that matches this ID,
Is VinPid,
you allow this user group. Usually it's tied to a user group. If a user is in this group, then they can access it with higher level privileges. But you can also, like when a certain device is plugged in, you can actually run a script. And that's the basics of this malware, right, Bill?
Yeah. So so it's funny though. I was really interested in why it stuck out to you. The reason why it stuck out to me is this is the first time. So this is a persistent technique that is not documented by MITRE ATT&CK. That's what stuck out to
Yeah,
me.
I thought that was interesting too.
Yeah,
Yes.
that this is so whether or not it's like, and I don't want anybody like yelling at me it's new or not new or whatever. It's new to
It's
me,
new.
right?
It's not new.
That's right, so
No, it's new.
and I think that's
It's new.
interesting, right? So that this went undetected for at least 2 years is what they're claiming, right? And so I just that's what I found to be interesting about this article was just hey, we found a new way to attack Linux systems. Yeah,
Or at least to maintain persistence.
It's interesting. So
right.
the UDEV rule gets triggered on reboot, and then runs the malware. And I'm not sure how it. I'm trying to decipher how it does that. So the malware makes use of UDEV rules to maintain persistence with a main focus on running /dev/random major equals 1, minor equals 8 after the computer is restarted. So they've constructed some UDEV rule that triggers when the system is restarted. I don't know the tie back to dev random and why that's triggered when it's rebooted, but anyways, it runs the malware, which forced me to go look at my UDEV rules to make sure there was no on all my Linux systems to make sure there's nothing. And then I thought about it some more, and I was playing around with Linus, is the Linux auditing toolkit.
Okay.
So it will analyze your Linux system and look for any kind of like known vulnerabilities or misconfigurations that are common to Linux systems. In a quick Google search, I couldn't find anything in Linus that would look for malicious UDEV rules. So back to your point, Bill, like it's not in MITRE ATT&CK. It's not in at least one of the more popular Linux auditing tools. I didn't check all of them. Linus just happens to be one of my favorites. I think it's pretty good for looking for stuff like that. But yeah, that's pretty good.
I wonder if it's in Bastille Linux. I mean Bastille-Linux.
I
There's a
don't know that's been maintained in 10 plus years.
and there's a joke there about the Bastille
because he
versus
lost the
Bastille
domain, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
domain hijackers took his domain and
Yep. So yeah, it's cool stuff.
Speaking of something in Bill's stories, Sonic drive-in operating system. What the hell is this?
So
if you
guys didn't read this story, it is it is interesting. Okay, so we've all been there, right? We've pulled into Sonic, and you're looking at 6 displays all around you with menus, and you press the red
with
button,
just delicious food,
with,
and you push the red button,
right,
and you're
so
high as, and they bring you your food.
Yep. So apparently, so on eBay, a bunch of SD cards started showing up that contained the operating system that drove those the Sonic operating system.
I
Someone
like
was
how they had to have a whole operating system just to
whole
display a
thing,
menu.
right? Yeah.
Because a lot of those are like Windows or Linux. I see a lot of images online where the menus have Windows boot errors or whatever.
Well, so so somebody posted this. So the reason why I came to find it was somehow the YouTube algorithm knew that that I would literally watch a 30-minute video of someone trying to get the Sonic operating system booting on some random hardware. Long story
So
short,
you can pull the SSD as 25.8 gig as opposed to archive.org, and it's the full operating system.
it truly is. So it turns out after some time it is a Windows based OS, and it is, so Sonic is running an application, but like the time and effort that this guy went into, if you ever want to see like great troubleshooting, just strange, weird hacking. So there's a whole community now that's being built around this Sonic operating system, and they're working on getting the red button to work. Right now, they haven't figured out how to get that to work.
But it's a Windows operating system.
Well, it's
probably
really
Windows
a Windows
embedded.
app. Yeah, it's a Windows app, but it's such
Gotcha, okay.
like
How do
what
people
an
have
odd
the time?
Right. That's exactly right, Josh. How and why? Who cares? It's awesome. Like, like, can you imagine? Like, what I want in my house? I want a Sonic operating system.
With a display,
Yeah.
and the red button.
Yep. I want
So
the
I can
whole
order
thing.
a double cheeseburger, a
Yeah.
shake,
And not pay for
and a
it.
hot dog.
Hopefully.
The hot dogs are awesome.
I would like
Corn
have to go
dogs.
make the food myself, skate myself the food, and then eat the food. Like this is
For sure.
vaguely ridiculous. But
Well,
hey,
no, if you have
God
the
bless
button, they
'em.
bring it right to you, Josh.
Not in your
You gotta wear-
house.
Josh, you got to put on your shorts to get your roller skates to bring
You
my
pay
food.
me extra for those, big boy.
You get an extra tip if you wear the shorts, Josh.
So what I really liked about specifically the YouTube video that I have linked there is that not only was he trying to get the Sonic operating system running, he tried to get it on this Micros point of sale system that he didn't even know how to power it. He's looking at it, and it's just there's odd ports all over it. He doesn't have the thing to connect to, the connector. How do I power this thing? Okay, I've got it powered up. Hey, it's booting to something. It's saying that it can't boot. I've removed all the hard drives. It was just such a great like hardware hacking adventure. And it pays off in the end. So it was.
I think this guy I'm looking at some of his other videos, like gaming on a Chinese English translator pen, and he's got Doom running on this translator. And this is my iPhone. It runs Android.
That's
Android 10.
awesome.
Android 10. Yeah.
Yeah, that's crazy. Bill, your new laptop has to run Sonic OS.
Deal. I'll give it a shot. Yeah, I'll ship it to that guy and like, hey, I don't give this back unless it's running that.
Well, you would need to make your laptop dual boot, though, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that was last week. I'm sorry.
No, because Bill said he needed a Windows system, and
That's
apparently
true.
this is Windows. So.
I love how this whole laptop's become a thing. Nobody knows what we're talking about, but we all do apparently.
Bill's laptop is a thing, man. Like, let me tell you,
it's true.
Bill's laptop it was your whole day.
That my whole day today, which concluded during our last interview. I will say.
All right, maybe if we have time at the end, we'll talk more about Bill's laptop.
Hopefully,
all I know is if it's got to run Sonic OS, he's got to get an IBM ThinkPad with a little red mouse.
That's right. So it's like a little red button.
Well, I've got great news. That's exactly what I ordered. So boom,
there you go.
Like crushing it over here.
And what is this? There was some CEO of Telegram, Pavel Durov, was arrested in France. I saw something about this. This is news because he was drug trafficking in ransomware groups. He was involved.
So
Because Telegram is it's like the Mos Eisley of apps, right?
And now, Paul, I'm slightly disturbed here that you don't know the gentleman's first name is pronounced Powell.
Powell,
Powell,
like General Powell,
as in Paul.
as in Paul. Is that
I didn't know where you're going with that. Awesome.
Yeah,
That
as
was
in
awesome.
Paul.
Yeah.
is that how you pronounce Pavel? Is Paul
Powell.
Powell?
That's where your name originates from, Powell.
Apparently so. Learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the story here is that I don't want to talk shit on Telegram or anything, but it would be my recommendation that you treat Telegram just like you would IRC, and that's been my recommendation for years. I don't have a whole lot of like inside information, but from what I read years ago, they implemented they rolled their own crypto stack. They were using their own crypto algorithms that sends flags for me, right?
That's
Like that.
never
Mhm.
never a good thing.
Never a good thing.
Never a good thing.
And
Well,
so,
I mean, it is a good thing. It's just not a good thing for all the consumers of said algorithms.
and so, a little bit what's happened is the CEO has been arrested in France, and since I posted this article, a little bit more information has come out that the president of France was apparently a big Telegram user, and
Uh-oh.
the French. Whoever, the French Secret Service or whoever they are, determined that all of his text messages or all of his Telegram messages were stored in clear text on the Telegram servers.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So that, because, Telegram has always been an odd, is it end to end? I don't know. Is it encrypted? I don't, yeah,
Sounds like we're
but
getting some answers.
sounds
But
like we're getting some answers.
it's also it's similar to Signal only in that it requires a SIM card, a cell phone number to tie back to, right?
That's true.
Like it's not an independent. It's not like WhatsApp, which doesn't require that. Correct?
Yeah, that is correct. I have a Telegram account and I only use it. So if you have not been on Telegram, it is a cesspool.
Mm-hmm.
It can only be described like going on tour, right? Like it.
Yeah, that's what like a lot of threat analysts they'll monitor Telegram to get threat intelligence about
Yeah,
malware groups, stuff being sold on the
and so
black market, if you will. I'm going to call it the black.
and
I
just
don't know
even
what to call it anymore, right? Because it's not the. I don't want to call it the dark web
It's
because
the
that's not
deep market.
so what has been
the underground market. Underground market.
to continue
That's-
what's been exposed about Telegram. Apparently, there was some some secret APIs that were inserted, that were available via Telegram that you could query unauthenticated to these APIs and get clear text messages of any group that had a bot in it. It doesn't matter if it's your bot. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter if it's your bot. If a bot was included into that channel was now just like IRC, completely,
well,
like
and that explains why so much intelligence was being gathered from Telegram.
for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Which is why I stayed away from the platform. Like when I get like one of my Android phones going, maybe that will have I don't know, some kind of SIM in it, and then I'll run Telegram on it. Right?
I actually run Telegram just as a receive only for some of the news channels. There are some amazing news channels on it.
Oh, for sure.
Much like IRC and
Absolutely.
Discord and all these other things, right? Like there's
TikTok.
Discord's a great example. Like I lurk in Discord in a lot of channels just to gather intelligence.
Yep.
You know?
But do you consider Discord to be private?
No, absolutely not.
So I think
because the same thing, like bots and the whole thing, like and the app is Electron, and I mean I protect my account. I have multi-factor authentication.
Do you consider like a private message on Discord private?
No,
not necessarily. No,
right, not necessarily. Right. So your threat model is a little bit different. That with Telegram going in, I think that most people agree when you're in a channel. That's probably public, but it's encrypted. They think it's Signal, right? Well, I mean,
right, and it's clearly not.
It's clearly not. And then that becomes the question: do you consider Signal private?
I do consider Signal private. You seem to be kind of skeptical, though.
Well,
Bill.
so I have some information.
Bill's like, we need disappearing messages.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Really?
Yeah, we definitely need.
Do
So
we?
let me tell you something. Like first of all, people, like set your disappearing messages to 1 week. It makes your life so much better. Because you only have to deal with that stupid thing you said for 7 days, and then you can say prove it, right? Like,
yeah. And then Ilmob comes up with a screenshot.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Don't even
Screenshot.
get me
Yeah.
started. I'm going to hit you.
Yeah, so there is some discussion around Signal. So I'm just going to tell you, I am a Signal user. I do believe that Signal is somewhat secure, right? Like I don't have any reason to believe
I
that it's
think
not.
a lot of us were pretty early. Bill, you were one of the early
For sure.
Signal users,
Yeah, so-
right? When I got on there, and then I used it to send you the pictures that we send each other,
That's
and it
right.
was super secure.
So
It was secure shit, man.
So from what I understand, the Signal desktop starts to insert some vulnerability into
Yes,
that.
Sure.
Right.
Well, I was going to bring that up because I use a lot of the Signal desktop.
Yeah.
Just
me
because
too.
I'd rather type with 10
For
fingers
sure.
than 2 thumbs.
And so like I think if you're going to have super high OPSEC, and if you're really doing something that you're really, really concerned about, that you should probably stay away from Signal desktop.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Bill, I want to talk about, because we talked about Frack magazine coming back, I believe, last week. And this week, your story number 1 has caught my attention.
Listen,
because the title is "Call This Number."
Call this number.
Call this number for a good time. Call. Can we?
Let's do it on the air right now.
So
Do
it. Call for a good time.
Country code +1.
212-203-4978.
So
We'll wait. Go ahead.
No, go. Can we do it? Can we do it? I don't even know if we can do it.
I wasn't prepared to do.
Yeah.
We could totally do it live on the air. I'm not prepared for that right now, but totally possible.
So while I was at DEF CON this year, and I was going around to the different villages, one of the things I came across was I'm sorry, village. I don't know if it was what it was exactly, but it was a freaking setup, and they had
it was a freaking village.
It was a freaking village, and they had.
Abandon all hope, ye who dial here.
Press pound for instructions.
Push pound.
For trivia, dial extensions 101 through 116 to hear each question.
So dial 401.
Dial extensions 201 through 207.
Type what I say. Freak me.
Now Larry's doing old school text messaging.
So I don't.
It's going to take him a while. Go ahead, continue, Bill.
Yeah. So my history is so when I was a youngster, before I even knew what hacking was, I became aware of phreaking, and and it was shared with various BBSs, and what I've done is I recently found my original red box. This was I bought this in 91, and made it when I was 16, those kind of things. And I've since, I think I've showed this on air before. I've since been buying every time one of these shows up on eBay, brand new in box, I'll buy them. Right. And,
and he keeps them right by his side.
Just
in case.
So there's a reason for that. So over the last week, I've just been kind of, I'm going to, be releasing like a history of phreaking, like going into the real nitty gritty details, showing you how to modify a red box, those kind of things. Well, so I come across this at DEF CON, the phreaking village. And as I was going through my DEF CON pictures, I noticed there was a phone number on the table of the phreaking village. And that's this number. And I got to tell you, if you've never done anything with phreaking or it's baked into your soul like me, this is an absolute treasure trove. So if you go to freakme.com, they have a completely free phreaking based CTF that you enter by calling that number, and it is fantastic.
And for the record, PH freak.
Yeah, PHREAKME.
I don't know where the FREAK me.com.
Right.
Bill,
Yeah, that'd be completely
Bill,
something
completely different.
Yeah.
Bill,
Yep.
quickly for our audience, difference between a blue box and a red box.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So the blue box really targets the way that calls are routed. So what you do is a blue box use the tone 2600 to basically take control of the trunk line, and then once you have control of the trunk line, you basically think of that as what you would consider of like routing. That's what you were doing with the blue box is adjusting the way that your phone call was routed.
Right.
A red box.
But it was routed via tones. The tones is what allowed you to break out from
That's right.
A regular call into the trunk line.
That's exactly right. Breaking out is the exact right term. So you were essentially able to break out of that phone and get control of the routing of the calls.
Because to use a blue box, you had to call a number.
Yep.
And typically they would use toll-free numbers to call into.
Well, because you got to be on the trunk, right? Like you got to be. It can't be a locally switched call or whatever.
And largely used to make free long distance calls in the blue box.
I would say
back in the day.
Yeah. So that was definitely a like a symptom of it, but really it was more about exploring the network. Right. So
yes.
Redbox, on the other hand, was purely about making free phone calls. And so what the Redbox did was it emulated the tones that the payphones used. You couldn't hear it on the handset, but when you put in a quarter, it would do a series of 5 beeps of a very special DTMF code, which is 2 tones being played at the same time.
Dual
tone multi-frequency.
That's right. And so,
Nice.
the red box emulated those tones, and and you could put quarters into the phones, right? And that's really where, so I kind of missed out on the blue box craze was kind of done by the time just I became of age. It was still
because they replaced a lot of the switches by that time.
They'd largely replaced all the 5ESS.
That being said, this number that you can call.
They re-implemented a 5ESS switch.
I'm not going to give away anything, but it is fantastic. Follow that white rabbit.
Awesome.
I think I got to call in sick for work tomorrow.
That's right. Yeah, man, it's incredible.
You work from home.
I know.
So if anybody, if anybody has any interest about that, really go to their website, go look at the CTF, because the CTF is just really well put together. You can see the challenges that are there. The call tree, those kind of things. It is absolutely fantastic.
Silly question, but none of this works these days with mobile phones, does it?
No, it doesn't. Right. So all of this things really kind of ended in the late 90s. It's really a something of the past.
It's nostalgic.
It's nostalgic. So
unless you still have a landline, in which case you could still play with it a little bit.
Well, so not as much, right? You can still do a lot of things like caller ID spoofing, ANI spoofing. A lot of there's still some dial outs, like where you dial into a number and then convince it to dial you out, of course. And then there's still like voicemail hacking, those kind of things. But phreaking is certainly still alive, but it's definitely I would say much more nostalgic part of hacking.
I'm trying to remember the last time I made a long distance call.
That's right. Like, can you imagine trying to explain to a kid what a long distance call was? Well, how do you?
Right.
Well, they're not in your same area code. What?
What? What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my older brother, he spent a year in Switzerland, his senior year. AFS. I don't remember what it stands for. But we were going to call them on Christmas Day, so we had to call an operator. That's a person. If you hit 0 or O at the bottom, you would talk to somebody and say, hey, we're going to make a long distance phone call, give them the number, and then we hung up and waited because there were only so many lines across the U.S. to Europe, running under the water, under the Atlantic Ocean. And 2 hours later, the phone rings, and the phone has been connected, and we're wishing my brother Merry Christmas.
If you are interested in this topic, I have a book recommendation. The book was published in 2014. Phil Lapsley is the author. It's called Exploding the Phone.
Yes.
Exploding the Phone.
Yes.
The untold story of the teenagers and outlaws who hacked Ma Bell.
Yeah.
It is probably like the seminal work on this topic if you want to understand it, for sure.
Yeah, and I'd also check out like the the phone losers as well. So our
phone.
yeah,
Oh my God! Yes.
Oh man,
Brad.
the PLA.
Brad is hilarious.
Is he still? Is he?
He
Is
is.
the phone loser still alive?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Brad and I go way back. You know, Brad and I have been friends for years, and so what Brad really brought to phreaking was his sense of humor is just it's unmatched. He is scared of nothing, right? He's not scared of being caught, and he is his sense of humor is just it's unparalleled. And so he's got a he's got a video on how to make a red box, and just within like 30 seconds of watching it, I'm literally crying laughing because he's just Brad's sense of humor is unbelievable. But so
he had a podcast back in the day when we started called like the Phone Losers Podcast.
Yep.
And it was
PLA, the Phone Losers America.
Phone Losers America. And oh my God, the content, it was kind of all over the map, but it was the most entertaining content.
So one time Trent and I invited him up to our hotel room. I don't know, we were going to go drinking or something. So we were in Vegas or DC, or maybe, I don't remember where we were at. And he was like, hey, watch this. And he hacked into the hotel's phone system and then started ringing rooms until they answered. And he ended up getting someone so mad that they went down to the front desk, and he was like, okay, now we go. And we went down to the front desk and hung out and just listened to the people just like, laying into the front desk. And dude, like, come on, man, that is so funny.
He was so convincing on prank phone calls. Probably one of the best prank callers I've ever listened to in my whole life.
Gosh, it's so funny. So my favorite prank call that he ever made. So he made a phone call to a
cactus.
That's funny. Cactus? But he made a phone call to an apartment complex and said, hey, I'm in apartment 1305. And I've been flushing sand down the toilet and it's clogged up. And they're like, you've what? And I'm like, well, I've got 40 bags of sand I got to get rid of. And they're like, what? And he was like, well, I talked it over with my girlfriend. We tried out the beach thing inside. It just didn't work out. So I'm trying to get rid of this sand, and
he's so creative.
Come on. Yeah.
But he's recorded a ton of those calls, which go dig them up because they're just, it's a national treasure.
And Mike, if I remember correctly, just one of the things that struck me that was amazing too, like I think earlier on in the show, he was like going through a divorce and all that type of stuff. He didn't have a ton of money. So like all of the equipment that he had
was
like
all Radio Shack.
Or he pulled out of a dumpster
for
somewhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or
dude, he is still that way. Last time he pulled up in this car and he had like one of the home air conditioning units like that you put in your window, like a window unit taped to his car, just like, God, dude, you're the weirdest dude I know. Like,
and he's awesome.
Yeah, he's awesome.
So I had kind of a nostalgic, my story number 19 is a journey into unexpected serial ports.
But no one expects a serial port.
Right. This was from Hackaday, and then I linked to the actual article. And so
I figured Josh would have at least gotten out of that one, but it looks like he's frozen.
He's
not frozen.
You there, Josh? We're talking about serial ports now, Josh. Serial ports.
Oh my God, I haven't seen a serial port since 2001.
So this person had like a 1990s Garmin GPS, and he was trying to interface with it to get the GPS data from, because I mean, GPS hardware is still GPS hardware. GPS is still GPS. Larry can probably most likely attest to this, right? Even in older devices from the 90s, GPS is GPS, right?
It's probably not going to be great resolution, but it's still going to tell you where on the planet you are roughly.
So he updated it. He had to install Windows 98 and install the software to update the GPS so that he could set the correct time.
Where did he find a floppy disk drive in order to install 98?
I know,
Goodwill.
Right? That could be in the article, but
he got one from Brad.
I fast forwarded to the part where he was trying to interface with the device via serial, and I'm like, well, I've done like serial's common now, right?
Mhm.
There's a header on the board. It's well documented. I've got probably half a dozen devices that talk serial, and we do this on embedded
But
systems
it's
all the
not
time.
really serial.
But it's not.
So that device was probably serial. The stuff that we interface with now, serial UART.
RS
Is
422.
UART, yeah. So
Yes.
UART is what we interface with, but what he talked about in this article is two different kinds, and I'll explain the third. He said there was TTL serial,
Yep.
in RS 232, right?
Yeah.
And so the variation, the third type that he found, he says this serial type operates between 0 and 5 volts like TTL serial, but with inverted data lines like RS 232, allowing it to be connected directly to PC serial port.
So it had a built-in null modem.
I suppose.
Inverted data lines. That's what a null modem is.
Right. Yeah. So awesome article, like really cool kind of serial stuff.
So for the record, serial UART just doesn't have to be serial. RS-232, it could be RS-485, RS-422.
Different protocols that run on top of the UART port.
So
correct,
RS-232 is a protocol, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep. And so RS-232 ran over serial at 5 volts. RS-232 can also run over UART at 3 volts or 3.3 volts. Ask me now, I know this.
Then there's
Yeah,
RS
how do you know that?
422, if you want to get really technical, which starts giving you directional information.
Yep.
How about
He had
RJ45?
Yeah, RS-485 and 422 can also go over UART.
so he had a Garmin GPS 95 and serial data displayed on a Handtech DSO 2D15 oscilloscope, and like wasn't interpreting correctly, and he like basically reverse engineered it. And eventually he got to a point where he programmed a board for his flipper that plugged into his flipper to be able to communicate with the device, which gave him latitude and longitude on the Flipper Zero device.
Yep, because it was
awesome.
it's probably all using the same GPS NEMA data, and likely the board was a level converter from 5 volts to 3.3.
Really cool, neat little project.
So speaking of Flipper, something that I didn't put in my stories, I was looking at the Flipper, Find My Flipper repo,
Yes.
and I found a new thing to use my cheap yellow display for, Paul. By using some of the information that was posted in the Find My Flipper, my cheap yellow display now detects AirTags and GPS and other Bluetooth tracking devices, which is what a neat little use for this. So I've started the repo on my GitHub. It's public, of course. And I'll I just today got delivered a bunch of other like Android and cheap generic Bluetooth trackers. I'll just be making sure that it can track that. So if you ever need to go sweep your car for Bluetooth trackers, there you go.
That's awesome.
Right.
And so,
but I got to check this out, Bill.
So Find My Flipper.
To
Find My Flipper is software that listens on Bluetooth Low Energy to find Flipper devices that might be launching like an Apple Juice attack over Bluetooth Low Energy or something different.
So the Find My Flipper app works just like an AirTag. So if you ever were to lose your Flipper,
right, we covered that. You
can find it in Find My. And so some of the so just looking through the code there, I was wondering, well, how do you get enrolled into Find My? And so there the author
Open Haystack.
Well, so the author of Find My Flipper released a method of cloning your existing AirTags, and so using that information was able to build that
and that was through Open Haystack, correct?
So I think that there was references to that, but I think most of his code was written by himself.
Yeah.
So you turned your cheap yellow display into an AirTag, basically.
AirTag detector.
AirTag detector, so it can detect nearby AirTags.
That's right.
Whether it's an official Apple AirTag or someone that's turned their Flipper into an AirTag.
You got it.
or
Gotcha.
their microbit.
That's right.
BBC microbit or their.
There's lots of ways to
ESP32.
emulate. You talked about this on the show
Yep.
a couple of years ago, right? Lots of ways to emulate an AirTag.
Yeah. So Larry, if you, like if you start looking through that and have anything to add, please let me know. So I'm actually kind of can't wait to get started on this. I've got them sitting on the table over the, so I've got like, I got a Tile, I got a Samsung, and not in the mail are still the cheap generic ones from AliExpress. So
Nice. Yeah, Bill, do me a favor. Drop me a link in Slack to that, and I will definitely check it out because I am teaching.
We have to abide by the unwritten.
617 with some of that stuff
Nice.
in it, and I'd like to build a cheap yellow display for class.
Cool.
We have to have the unwritten contract that whatever we order from AliExpress, we share with each other the links to.
That's true. That's true.
Because it's a
not everything.
Interesting. Well, maybe not everything. Yes, not everything. I don't want it electronics related. No, I strike that. We'll write up a policy, okay? A carefully worded policy and have it approved by legal.
But wait, but sometimes we want to hack the Internet of Dongs.
This is true. This is true. Is that where you got your stuff for your Internet of Dongs research? Or did you go Amazon?
Amazon.
What? You don't buy dongs from Amazon. You buy them from AliExpress.
Well, I mean, if you want the name brand, you have to buy it from Amazon.
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
just not going there. I'm just not going there.
No, that's you know
Hey,
what?
Can we
pick another
Because
story?
Josh,
but hold on, we're on Bluetooth. We're talking about Bluetooth
Josh gets all his from Temu.
While we're on the subject of Bluetooth Low Energy, and on my story number 17, Gray Noise Labs has done analysis of healthcare devices and firewalls that run BLE. Because when you get a firewall appliance, you configure it with your phone, and it has some Bluetooth Low Energy capability. Again, the technical details are awesome, and I haven't digested all the technical details.
What number is it?
My story number 17.
I also had this story, but
Yeah.
it was Paul's 17.
But so, like, surrounding this article is a fantastic discussion and a lot of thought-provoking kind of comments in there about how we as a society deal with Bluetooth devices in general, right? Whether it's Bluetooth, whether it's Bluetooth Low Energy, right? We're making a distinction that, Wi-Fi and other protocols, Ethernet, right, have IP addressable networks associated with them. But Bluetooth, that doesn't have that IP component to it, and allows you to interact with the devices that are in proximity. So the article says, like, from insulin pumps to firewalls, the best case scenario of Bluetooth Low Energy security and privacy is abysmal.
Yep.
Zeno Kova, who's amazing, by the way. I had an opportunity to meet him at ShmooCon and interview him on the Below the Surface show. It speaks a lot about Bluetooth and Bluetooth Low Energy. Has some amazing projects and spoke at ShmooCon 2024 about his project in Bluetooth stuff. But he was at hack.lu and is quoted as saying, the conclusion is, this is like a conclusion to his Bluetooth talk. The conclusion is, Bluetooth vulnerability assessment is not even a thing. For those of you that work enterprise security, I'm happy to tell you, don't worry. There's nothing you have to do because there's nothing you could do even if you wanted to. I hope that makes you feel better. Zeno Kova. And so
He's not wrong.
What the article also touches upon is an interesting attack scenario that we were talking about, Bluetooth Low Energy, finding flippers, also on a lot of the flipper and flipper-like devices. I'll get to Gurkon in a moment, right? But Larry and I were looking at some of the M5 stack devices that I have. You can do things like apple juice, right? And so I had to explain this to some of my coworkers, right, in marketing, because I'm like, I want to bring these devices to a conference. I want to hack on them, and they're like, well, like, what is like apple juice? I'm like, well,
it's a drink.
So you spoof the devices, and it comes up on your Apple phone, like, hey, do you want to connect to it, right? And you can spoof those kind of things. And so within the context of like a medical device, they were like, well, what if I could constantly communicate with that low energy device and drain its battery?
Yep.
If that's something like an insulin pump or something that is providing some kind of health monitoring, health benefit to the user, if I can drain the battery, just because in the air in the open spectrum, everything is fair game, barring FCC regulations, right? I can drain the battery. And that's something that we need to pay attention to in FDA regulations, which we have. And some of that ties back to the app. So they started unpacking an Android app, looking at the security of that Android app and how it interacts with the device. So I think the two things for me are the threat of health devices draining the battery just because you're in proximity, right? Because
So are there
the apple juice did that by byproduct. The reason why I stopped running some of those Bluetooth Low Energy attacks is because people would have insulin pumps and hearing aids and other such devices, and they're like, my
Glucose monitors.
stuff is all messed up, right? And I'm like, well, I gotta like slow my roll. I gotta make sure that I'm not causing harm to general society. I mean, it goes back to like live on the air a few weeks ago. All my lights started flickering in here because infrared, and I launched an attack, and it was bad. But that doesn't absolve us from recognizing the vulnerability and trying to come up with ways to combat it, right? Which is kind of speaking to what Zeno said. So I wanted to get your kind of take on how do we get a handle on these protocols and basically safety.
Well, I'm curious, are there any embedded medical devices that have a battery? Like that have Bluetooth Low Energy, I guess maybe,
pacemakers.
The insulin pumps are not
correct.
They're
pacemakers, internal implanted defibrillators.
But do they have Bluetooth Low Energy
with a battery?
Yes, the pacemakers have BLE. The newer versions of pacemakers have BLE to communicate for testing and for calibration and for making sure you're
But is the human literally the battery in that?
No, they do have a battery,
Okay.
and they do need to be replaced from time to time.
I think it's like every few years.
It's like 7 years or something.
Yeah, something like that.
I'll have to ask a friend who has one.
Yeah, unless you were to deplete the battery through a BLE attack, that's frightening.
But my also understanding in those cases of those types of devices, Josh, the only time that the Bluetooth Low Energy is enabled is when you are in presence of the reader programmer that has some other method to enable it. Like
I didn't say that wasn't true, but they do have Bluetooth Low Energy.
Agreed. And I'm just setting the stage like, oh my God, I have a pacemaker and it's going to drain it and I won't live. Now, usually there's some other method that is involved for turning that on. Yeah. And like for one example, a magnet.
Yeah.
You need to be up close and personal to the device with a magnet to enable that. As someone who uses a continuous glucose monitor, I've actually had to reboot one of my quote, topically implanted glucose monitors by using a magnet because it didn't pair with my phone. And there's a magnet in the dispenser that when it's not near the magnet, it actually powers the device finally.
You know, by the way, that there was at least one very interesting place that Jeff might have worked at in the past that used to use this kind of attack to make sure that your cell phone, even if you brought in a cell phone to the facility, it was dead. They had a range of cell phone towers around the parking lot, and they would just flash on and off.
Yep. So you're constantly trying to connect to a tower.
And your phone basically, because that's a higher power usage of your phone would be dead by the time you walked in the door.
Well, so to go back to Paul's question, like I think that, for one, let's not release any battery depleting BLE exploits, right? Like, let's not do that, right? But I think that it is more important that and I really don't know that the medical side very well, but anytime I would imagine that they have to be doing some like, I mean, do they require like a what is that, the FDA? Like, is there any, like, is FDA, do they test BLE? I don't know.
Technically, no.
Well, they should. Well, also
maybe.
Okay. So for Bluetooth Low Energy, that's a good question. Well, so FDA, like Josh Corman came on the show and detailed like how the regulations were updated for the FDA to include cybersecurity evaluations for medical devices. And they've since been doing that. That passed as a law. It's a huge win. to make sure that devices that are providing, healthcare, safety, life critical services include a cybersecurity component. So basically, the FDA can recall a device based on cybersecurity requirements that weren't met.
Sure.
Is the gist of that, right? Also, if you are to, and Larry, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to try and summarize this. If you are to sell a device in the US that emits, transmits, and or receives radio frequencies, it has to be registered with the FCC. So I would imagine these medical devices have to go through both the FCC and the FDA.
And that would be transmit.
Just transmit.
Yeah,
okay.
Receive does not need to go to the FCC. Transmit only.
On any,
and it has to have had
not any radio frequency.
No, only so those that undergo what is it, Title 15, I think it is. So those that are using ISM bands, industrial, scientific, and medical.
Okay.
So 900 megahertz, 433 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz, some 6 gigahertz stuff now. All the stuff that we can buy as a consumer and don't need to go get a license to operate.
Has to get an FCC ID, has to be tested by the FCC.
Well, it's not actually tested by the FCC. It's tested by a third party, and then they review the results and can grant. It's basically to make sure.
But they're not testing for cybersecurity.
Nope. Yeah. It's RF interference and appropriate use of the spectrum.
Right. That's how we can go pull the FCC ID. You can see like pictures from the lab where they're testing the device. Like,
hey, look, that's a really detailed picture. It's got that chip in it.
Yeah,
I can make now some educated guesses about what types of protocol it's speaking. Yes. Yeah, that documentation. And just because you're not in the U.S. doesn't mean that FCC ID printed on your device isn't valid for you for doing that type of research. Oh, it is. Leverage the U.S.'s public documentation for those. And most manufacturers typically put an FCC ID on their device because they sell the same packaging worldwide. Right. Okay.
So speaking of the U.S., I really wanted to talk about your number 20, Paul. The U.S. Marshal Service disrupts ransomware disputes the breach claims. I wanted to hear Jeff's opinion on this. So there is a threat actor called Hunters International. They're a well-known ransomware gang that recently published so the way Hunters works is they publish data before we publish data here. Like we've hacked
a sample. It's like a sample.
It's like a sample, but if you've gone out to their Tor site and you go and look at the U.S. Marshals, that you do see that they're listed. You do see the sample of data, but you cannot expand the data that it's posted.
Right.
So one of the things that the threat actor has claimed is they've stolen files containing copies of passports and other identification. However, here's the kicker. They're also saying that some files are marked as secret or even top secret. Right? Now I'm curious.
But the marshals are saying this is from a previous data because they had a breach disclosure in 2020, another one in 2023, and what they're saying is this is previous leaked data. This isn't new. That's what the Bleeping Computer article said.
Interesting. So they're claiming that the data that Hunters has. This is a question, not a statement, Paul. So they're claiming that the data that they believe that Hunters has is from previous breaches.
Correct.
So has the
is
U.S.
it the same data and they just figured out another way to get it?
Well, I'm curious how how did data that's marked secret or top secret get available to a ransomware gang?
Great question.
It shouldn't be able to be secret, and top secret data should be handled on SIPRnet or something similar. And top secret shouldn't even be on SIPRnet. It should be on high side.
Yep.
But I mean, you're talking about either it was misclassified, or in other words, it's not actually top secret data. Something like that's not top secret and threw it in the general population, if you will, or it was misfiled, put in the wrong place. I'm using the word filed wrong, but you get the idea. Or they got into something really serious, and there's some very badly crossed wires over there at the Marshal Service.
So here's the article. It's tough to decipher and get a timeline. Let's see if we can break it down. So So U.S. Marshals claim the agency. So the agency didn't provide any additional information. However, Believing Computer said that the data published by Hunters International on their dark website is the same as the data put up for sale in March 2023 on a Russian-speaking hacking forum. There, a threat actor named Tronic claimed in 2023 the stolen files contain copies of passports and identification documents, aerial footage and photos of military bases and other high secure areas, blah, blah, blah. And some files are marked as secret or top secret. It's unclear whether Tronic is now associated with Hunters, right? Because Tronic was the Russian data site. Hunters International is what Bill described on the Tor site. But then 1 month earlier, February 2023, so back in the timeline, U.S. Marshals confirmed it was investigating the theft of sensitive law enforcement information after a standalone U.S. Marshal system was impacted by a ransomware attack. And they are quoted as saying, the affected system contains law enforcement sensitive information, including returns from legal process, administrative information, and personally identifiable information pertaining to subjects of U.S. Marshals investigations, third parties, and certain U.S. Marshal employees.
So what's really interesting is, so I've dealt with Hunters before. For a client of mine, I've worked with Hunters before. I know they're kind of their MO. But one of the things that's really interesting about Hunters is they will go through the data that they've stolen and then build like kind of like collections of data and then publish those collections. And then the last collection is all data. So looking at the U.S. Marshals, the collections they've listed are gang files, confidential, top secret, FBI docs, confidential device info, cases, active cases, Operation Turn.
Wait, Bill, that's more than what was posted to the Believing Computer article, Bill.
Well, I'm looking at them right now. I probably shouldn't say Operation Turnbuckle. I don't know what that is, but probably shouldn't say that. And then
there's a buckle and it turns.
Yeah,
but it's been leaked. It's been leaked.
That's right.
It's not the first time, nor is it the last time that data has been published on the internet, and we're just like, it's there, right? And we're not necessarily downloading it; we're just reading what's there.
Yeah. So like, you know, and I don't like, actually I don't like to download any of that stuff anyway. Like,
no.
but I do think that it's pretty interesting, and so there's 22 hours left on the Hunter site right now, 22 hours, 1 minute before they publish this data. So this is going to be an interesting story, you know, probably for next week to see who's telling the truth. Is it Hunters or is it the U.S. Marshals?
Or is it Tronic?
Right.
Or yeah, there's all kinds of speculation. Is Tronic working with Hunters? Is Tronic part of Hunters now? Whatever. Yeah. That's interesting.
Is his first name Elek?
Oh, no.
Yes. Pretty sure.
I thought it was Pavel.
Pavel.
So, how does a standalone device get ransomware?
A standalone?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they popped one system, and on the screen of that one system is a ransomware note. You want the system back, you got to pay a ransom.
Here, plug in this USB drive, and I'll tell you.
Well, see. I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that, Jeff. Like, if it's standalone, it can't run.
No, if it's smashed,
how is it supposed to? How is it supposed to ran somewhere if it's stand alone?
Oh my God!
Oh God! Seriously?
All right, Larry's cut off.
We're done.
Last drink, Larry.
We're done. Larry.
I did have something for Jeff though, because I know Jeff loves the terminology and defining terminology, and I appreciate that, Jeff. I really do. And my story number 23, which ties into my story number 22 about the IPv6 vulnerability in Windows and whether or not it can be exploited. I want to weave that into our discussion about my story number 23, which is our good friend Patrick over at Vulncheck.
Yeah.
Patrick Garrity. He's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So Patrick took a stab at, in this blog post, weaponized vulnerabilities deserve a seat at the prioritization table.
No.
Right? Great title.
Yeah.
Great title. Yeah. So he's taken a stab at what weaponized means.
Right.
And so here, I'll read it for you. Weaponized vulnerabilities are those with explicit malicious intent, historic malware usage, prior reports of exploitation, or inclusion in point-and-click exploitation frameworks or kits. Projects facilitating point-and-click exploitation could include malicious exploit kits, or open source commercial offerings like Metasploit, VulnCheck, Initial Access Intelligence, Canvas, or Core Impact. Additionally, weaponized exploits often have secondary payloads, droppers, or implants. In VulnCheck's State of the Exploitation report published in May, they observed 2% of vulnerabilities over the past decade have been weaponized according to their definition. I summarized that definition for weaponized means there's a working exploit that can carry a payload that will have some impact on the system. However, I do want to come up with a way to distinguish between an exploit that carries a payload and can affect, like allow the attacker to do something, versus an exploit that can basically just crash a system, right? And then I think we need to separate crash a system versus crash an application as further classification. I think that deserves its own category when I'm evaluating the threat, determining the risk. Hopefully I'm using that terminology correctly. Jeff, I want to know, is this something that's just going to cause disruption, or is this something that's going to give an attacker a foothold in the ability to execute a payload? So that's how they define it.
So I mean,
Discuss.
I'll throw a quick one out there. One of the things that you mentioned, is it cause, is it going to allow us to crash something reliably, or is it give us remote control of the system? And for something with explicit malicious intent would be denial of service and explicit malicious intent.
Yeah.
So then something that just causes a crash could arguably be considered weaponized.
Weaponized vulnerabilities are those with explicit malicious intent. If your intent is to crash a system, I would categorize that. What I'm saying is we need a couple different levels of weaponized. Execute a payload versus crash an application versus crash the entire system, perhaps. Jeff, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, my initial thought is when you were reading the definition, I started wondering when you were going to end because it kept
It's a long definition.
It's a very long definition, which is as you're alluding to, it almost begs to be further defined. I like the idea of using a term like weaponized, especially building on the conversation was just last week, our first segment when we were trying to figure out prioritization of vulnerabilities and how to fix it. I mean, there's a correlation here. I would lean towards a definition of weaponization. I mean, it's going to be arbitrary, and everybody's going to disagree and have their own spin on it. But weaponization, to me, I think could boil down to two things, and I think we've said it. One is it's doing something bad in and of itself, or it's enabling a payload where something else could be done. And but that even begs, has somebody done that? Is there a specific payload that's out there that's already known to be used with this particular vehicle, if you will? The risk is, from what I've heard, crashing systems, preventing operations, preventing things from happening. That's the risk. The threat is this thing. The vulnerability is what is it exploiting, and then the prioritization is where we're trying to come up with, well, it's a really bad vulnerability because, and one of the criteria for it's really bad, fix this sooner, would be weaponization. That's what's coming to my mind right now.
Yeah, I think weaponized is like whether or not you're just crashing the system or whether or not you're able to execute arbitrary code, as it were, right? That would imply the payload portion of it.
Right.
You, in a lot of cases, I would apply the same prioritization for it, right? Because if, especially, so like, let's apply this to CVE 2024-38063, which is the remotely accessible vulnerability in the IPv6 stack in Windows systems. Like whether or not an attacker can crash the system, whether or not they can execute a malicious payload, I think like my prioritization is the same. Like,
Right.
can we just fix this? Largely because the access vector is network, right? In the CVEs score, they call it access vector, like it's network. So I'm like, if anyone can touch that system over the network, they can either crash it or they can execute code. I'm like, you know what? I probably want to fix that. But also I want to factor in the impact operationally to me. Fixing it is another factor.
Yep.
I think, I haven't heard of people having a bad time applying this patch. Typically, you hear about that if this patch caused other kind of adverse effects on the system. I also think that IPv6 may not be like operationally in the critical path. Yes, enabled by default in Windows, but largely like IPv4 is how we communicate. So I would say apply this patch. And I'm basing that on research where Malware Tech wrote a blog on my number 22, right? Really smart people,
Right.
Marcus Hutchins being one of them,
Yep.
goes, I analyzed this. Like, I couldn't figure out how to get code execution on it. Like, it's really hard. So that's a data point, certainly.
Right.
The proof of concept exploits that I've seen, like literally internally, we've been talking about them, and some of the smartest researchers that I work with go, that's great. Like, that's a proof of concept, but it doesn't do anything. Right?
Right.
Like, they look at the code and they immediately like, it doesn't do anything. I'm like, wait, I went and looked at the code. I'm like, hold on, like that doesn't do anything. Like that might one I saw like might crash the system. The other one I'm like, I don't know what that was.
But
Like,
I think Paul, part of the problem is, we're talking about almost unlimited permutations of what could happen, and we're trying to boil it down to traditionally everything is boiled down to whatever scan engine you're using, critical, high, medium, low. And we're even trying to boil it down to like fix now, fix yesterday, fix
next week.
next week, fix whenever you get around to it. We're trying to boil it down to like maybe 3 or 4 categories that we traditionally call critical, high, medium, low. And the characteristics, the things that could happen, what we struggle with is, but did it happen, or how hard is it to have it happen? What's the likelihood that somebody's going to do everything that they need to do, and all the conditions have to be right? That factors, and that's what CVS has attempted to do, is try to factor all that in. You know, any effort, I guess, is probably a good thing. But what most people are wanting to know is, what do I have to fix now, and what do I not? I think it's binary. What do I have to fix?
So Paul, let me.
What do I not really care about?
So
right. Go ahead,
so
Bill.
Paul, so right now, when we take a look at the IPv6 patch, your recommendation is to apply it, right? Apply it, right? Does your opinion change if tomorrow you wake up and there is an exploit, a metasploit?
Yeah. So what I actually wrote in my description, at least I thought I wrote in my description, but my thinking was, well, I should patch this. Like, if there's an exploit and we're debating whether or not an attacker could do a reliable exploit that gave them a payload, like maybe best case they can crash the system. I want to go start applying that patch now.
Well, you want
right.
You
And
want
no,
to
I've got some use cases, not to everything, but I've got some use cases. But I want to start the process now so that when someone does figure out maybe someday how to exploit it, I'm not initially vulnerable to that first wave, because that could be a bad day for me, whether it's crash the system or execute code. I want to get ahead of that and be like, look, I already applied that patch, or I disabled IPv6 on my system. But the kind of threat model or risk equation is different, whether that's a desktop or laptop versus a server. Right,
especially
server sitting there running some kind of mission critical application. I want to patch that shit first. If one of my employees is at a coffee shop and someone can crash their laptop, much less of an impact to my organization versus my server. So I would, if I were the CISO, I would prioritize servers, get this patch, or turn off IPv6 if I don't need it, and then start rolling it out to desktops. to get ahead of it, because someone could someday figure out how to do it, right?
Yeah, but I think
Yeah,
the
so
difference is like right now, like so, and you know, maybe we're not talking about the IPv6 patch or whatever, but just
Sure.
kind of the way that you started, like I haven't heard any problems with it, you know, like so the what I hear from there is like, hey, start rolling that out, put it, yes, patch that, right? The problem is when it hits Metasploit, like it's patch it right now, and like right now,
Right.
right now. So I completely agree with this article. They do, like, I think that they do need a seat at the table.
well, so let me ask the question in this way. Most of my clients over the years, for the very critical vulnerabilities that are disclosed and discovered and show up in their scanners and whatnot, they typically, the ones that get a logo and they're in the headlines and they're impacting other companies, I don't know what we would call that category. Most of my clients over the years, they're getting that fixed within 7 days. But the particular regulatory standard that I am most familiar with requires the installation of patches that fix critical vulnerabilities, critical security vulnerabilities within 30 days. Clearly 30 days isn't always good enough. There's some that, okay, we got to do this now. But in general, given all the other factors that we're talking about that are non-technical, in a sense of the criticality of the system, the location in your environment, the potential ripple effect, or whatever you want to classify it, is 30 days enough? Quick enough?
Well, I think, it's interesting to go back to what Bill was saying. Once it's in Metasploit, you should have patched it yesterday. Like, you should have patched it the day before it landed in Metasploit.
Right.
Yeah.
Once it's in Metasploit, like,
Does
you're
Metasploit,
kind of
other
screwed.
than having it in your possession, in your arsenal, does Metasploit publish what's going into their engine, payload, whatever they call it?
Sure. Right.
Yeah,
Like,
it's public.
yeah.
It's public. But on
Okay.
the other hand, you've also got the fact that people put in stuff all the bloody time.
Yep. Yep. Hey, great little bit talking about when we're saying, how do we talk about terminology and we're using the right ones. Paul, you posted one, and I don't know if you have this actual story here. But when did we start referring to zero-day network attacks as no-click?
The zero click.
Oh,
Zero
don't go
click.
there.
click.
Jesus,
I've seen
that's
this trend. No,
Oh.
I want to call out this trend because I want it to stop.
Because it's bullshit.
Yeah, because I don't like it. I think it's confusing. I think that we need to have a standard language in which we talk about
To Jeff's point.
vulnerabilities and threats, right? And I think
you're
when we're
really taking the wind out of marketing sales here, man. This is really rude, okay?
So,
Marketing
but
would like to have a word with you.
like, let's go
I'd like to
back.
have a word
Let's
with
go back.
marketing.
Let's go back 20 years.
You'd
right?
like to have a clue about marketing.
Largely, we were exploiting network over the network,
Mhm.
exploiting a service remotely. We'd call that remote code
Code
execution.
execution.
We call that like network-based remote code execution.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't require user interaction.
Mhm.
Then we all got these fancy smartphones.
Yep.
And these attacks started coming across via, let's just one attack vector, SMS.
Sure.
So you get an SMS message. In some of those attacks, you had to actually click, like, and it's funny that we say click. I think it's funny we say click, because on your smartphone, there's no click.
Right.
You're pushing the damn screen, right?
Zero tap.
But we still call that a click when it's a tap, right, Bill? To your point. And so, like, I had
and
to
the
tap
save
link.
icon is a 3.5-inch floppy disk.
Yep.
Right.
I tell my
Yeah,
kids to hang up the
exactly.
phone.
Right. All right. So we're clicking the link on our phone, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. There is some
and
user.
then
There's user interaction involved.
user interaction. I had to do something. I had to tap. I had to click. But then, like, super smart people developed amazing exploits and discovered vulnerabilities, wrote exploits for them that all you had to do was receive the text message.
You didn't have to
You
click.
You just had to receive the text message, and that could exploit your phone. And we called those zero click. And I think that was proper on a phone.
Me too.
For some reason. I don't know why it's proper on a phone, but not proper
or delivered through a web browser.
Or delivered through a web browser, right?
Well, so what I
visit
what
a
I pulled
site.
out of that is no user interaction.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
But that is.
But it's kind of counterpoint to
Yeah, you're right.
where we were before when we had all PCs, where we're like, no, it's either like exploited over the network remote code execution, or
with no
it
user
required
interaction.
user interaction. Like user interaction is the flag. I think they're called like this IPv6 thing was called zero click. I think
So
we're just
zero
confusing terms.
UI. How's that?
Zero user interaction.
Yeah. So, but now, Jeff, user interaction is also user interface. So now,
Well,
yeah.
Overloading a term now.
So the point being was like the article we were discussing, Paul, was like, when did we start calling network RCE zero click exploit?
It seemed like this IPv6 thing was the first time I started seeing that.
Is a zero click. Like
Yeah.
you said, who calls it a zero click exploit? And I'm like, the same people that
What
call
marketing
authentication
department coined
bypass
the term?
Yeah, the same group of people that call authentication bypass privilege escalation.
Yeah,
because you go from no privileges to having privileges.
Like no
Bullshit.
No, we need a standard
So what do you
language
call
to
going
understand.
from user privileges to admin privileges?
That's privilege escalation.
Ta-da!
But
However, sometimes
that was the camera, not the microphone, Jeff.
Oops.
Jeff literally turned off his camera to cough. That was great. That was awesome.
Yeah,
I
you
love
didn't
that.
see the
Don't
phlegm
edit that
flying
out.
out. That's what I was
That
concerned
is,
about.
yeah, that is.
Did
Don't edit that out.
The
Did you,
loogie
did you
hit
turn
my
the camera?
screen.
Did you can't turn the camera off because did you have to turn your head and cough?
That's right.
Got it.
Sorry, I just hit the wrong
Now I don't remember what I was saying. What was I saying? Oh, we were talking about. But so the other interesting thing is, I am currently writing an article about Cisco NXOS vulnerabilities. This is the technology I was referring to earlier that I was trying to understand, because there's a Israeli incident response company called Signia, I believe is the name, and they did the analysis of Velvet Ant, Chinese threat actors. They had dubbed Velvet Ant. I haven't got to the point where I figured out why it was called Velvet Ant, but they called it payload Velvet Shell.
But do they have a logo and a theme song?
Yeah.
Oh,
They do not.
So
It's just a name. Just a name at this point.
Okay.
So they initially targeted F5 load balancers, but then they did an incident response gig, if you will, where they looked at where they had compromised Cisco NX OS devices. And I was like, I'm really rusty on my Cisco stuff. Like, I don't work with a lot of Cisco stuff. And so I was like, oh, they're for Cisco Nexus switches. It stems from a storage area network operating system they had.
Okay.
But the NX OS is an iOS-like interface that's built on top of Linux. It turns out there was all kinds of reasons why they adopted Linux for modularity, where they can implement open source and they can like modularly build the operating system for it. But then there's like layers of NXOS, where as an administrator, I interface with NXOS, but underneath it's Linux. But I interface with the NXOS layer.
Right.
What the Velvet Ant threat actor group figured out was a 0-day vulnerability that allowed them to, some people call it privilege escalation, some people call it jailbreaking, but they're basically able to break out from NXOS and gain access to the Linux operating system underneath, and then leverage that for their C2 infrastructure, upload, download files, implement proxies and tunnels because it's Linux and it's Linux under the covers. And I'm like, that's not really privilege escalation. It's more like a jailbreak.
It is
in my mind.
like
it
a
does
hypervisor
require
jailbreak.
administrative privileges on the device in order to do that. So in my mind, I'm like, that's really more like a jailbreak. Like, yeah, they are escalating privileges, but it has a jailbreaking component to it. I don't even think we have great language to, like, how do you combine jailbreaking with privilege escalation?
And that's really, and that's, I mean, I don't work with a lot of Cisco gear either, but that's kind of fascinating because I know that Cisco has been doing that NXOS base for more than a decade.
2006 is when it came to market.
That's almost 2 decades.
Yeah. So I mean, I learned about it more than a decade ago when they purchased a company that was doing some pole top aggregation stuff for smart energy. They purchased, and the company was running Linux to control the device. So they basically emulated Cisco iOS on top of Linux.
Right.
Yeah.
And
terrifying.
And so it's interesting as I'm looking at this, and doing in the context of my day job, like just when we started the show 5 hours, so maybe around noontime Eastern, Cisco released like 4 or 5 more vulnerabilities that they patched in NXOS that were legitimately, when I read a couple of them, were more like privilege escalation vulnerabilities. Like, oh, you're
Actual
this
privilege
user on the
escalation.
device. Yeah, like you're this level user on the device, and through a vulnerability, if you exploit it, you could be a higher privilege user on the device. And didn't seem like the jailbreak kind of thing. So, but back to the point again, we have to classify all this stuff between remote command injection, right? Authentication bypass versus jailbreak versus privilege escalation. I mean, does it matter?
Yes.
How do we have to classify and prioritize these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have to have a common language to talk about them.
If only.
If only.
And on that note.
Oh, we're up on time.
Yep.
Look at that. Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.